Apple has three new iPhones, the iPhone 11, 11 Pro, and 11 Pro Max. Let's break down all the details to work out if it's worth the upgrade. It's time to dive into Apple's announcements this week from its September launch event. I'll be filling in for Vanessa over the next couple of months, so let's get right down to what you're really here for, which is brand new Apple products. Now, apart from the iPhones, which we'll get into soon, the new Apple Watch got an incremental update this year, and we're now up to the Series 5. On top of everything in the Series 4, like an ECG app and fall detection, you now get a compass and a full-color, always-on Retina display. Of course, it shows you the time, just like an analog watch would, but it also gives you workout details too on that always-on display. Battery life is the same as the Series 4, coming in at around 18 hours, so you will still need to charge it every day to day and a half. We also got a new 10.2-inch iPad with Smart Connector for $329, and finally we get pricing on Apple Arcade and the Apple TV Plus streaming service. Both will cost $4.99 per month in the US. But the heart of Apple's product line is of course the iPhone. Let's get into the specs and compare them to last year's models. Starting with the flagship 11 Pro and 11 Pro Max. Now, Apple's changed up the naming convention this year and gone for regular numbers instead of the somewhat confusing Roman numerals on last year's XS and XS Max, or XS and XS Max for everyone who's not a tech journalist or an Apple employee. From the front, it doesn't really look like much has changed between the 11 Pro and the phone it replaces, the XS. Now, size-wise, they're exactly the same, 5.8 inches or 6.5 inches for the Max models, although the new phones have a Super Retina XDR display, which is still an OLED for the record. Apple says that this new screen has a brightness of 800 nits in bright sunlight and up to 1200 nits when viewing extreme dynamic range content, say like an HDR10 movie. That notch at the top of the screen with the true depth camera is not going anywhere for at least another year. But now we at least get a little bit of a resolution bump to a 12 megapixel selfie camera over the 7 megapixels on last year's model, and Face ID is said to be faster and will apparently work from a couple more angles. This year's color finishes are nothing too crazy: a gold, space grey, silver, and a midnight green, which to me looks almost a little bit like British racing green on classic cars. The back is now a textured matte glass, which definitely looks nicer and should be easier to hold than the glossy versions from last year's phone. But Apple's made some bold claims here, saying that they have the toughest glass in any smartphone on the front and the back. Last year's iPhones, though, were significantly stronger than any previous model, and it took several drops in our informal drop test to get them to break. So let's just say I am very much looking forward to testing Apple's claims. And you'll be able to take these phones to even greater depths underwater, 4 meters for 30 minutes, rather than the 2 meters for the same time on the XS and XS Max. I did some pretty extreme water testing on those phones last year, and trust me, I'm not going to take it any easier on this year's models. But the biggest differences in the design of the phones are, of course, the camera square around the back. The new phones add a 12 megapixel ultra-wide camera to the regular wide and 2x telephoto cameras, which are also 12 megapixels. Now, the telephoto camera is slightly faster with an aperture of f2 compared to last year's f2.4. Now, we've seen ultra-wide lenses on several Android phones before, like the Galaxy Note 10 Plus and the Huawei P30 Pro, but this is a first for the iPhone, so you'll be able to get a lot more in your shot without needing to move back. On some of those other phones, though, the photos can look quite different in terms of color and exposure between the shots taken on the wide angle and the ultra-wide angle lenses. Apple's got a whole section on its website talking about how the cameras are calibrated for white balance and exposure, so I think it's going to be really interesting to see how all this works in the real world. On the software side, we are finally getting a dedicated night mode that automatically turns on depending on the lighting in the scene. It will take multiple photos in quick succession, stitch them together, align them, adjust contrast and colors, and reduce noise. And Apple also says that Smart HDR has been improved over the old phones, and this year's phones will get a feature called Deep Fusion in the fall via a software update that promises to optimize for detail and less noise. Now, these software additions are all new for the iPhone, and right now, I'm not sure if they're going to be backwards compatible with older phones. But it does look unlikely because they rely in part on that new A13 Bionic chip. Some other incremental updates include, of course, upgrading to an A13 chip over last year's A12, but we're losing 3D touch with the new phones and instead getting haptic touch just the same as we saw on the iPhone XR. You do get Wi-Fi 6 in all the new phones, but there is no 5G support. As the rumors suggest, you will want to look to next year's phones for that. Now here's probably the biggest jump in performance from old to new phones. The 11 Pro gives you up to 4 hours more battery life than the equivalent XS from last year, and the 11 Pro Max is 5 hours more than the XS Max. You'll also get an 18-watt fast charger in the box rather than having to buy it extra. Let's not forget that this is still a $1,000 phone and you're only getting 64 gigabytes of storage at this level. You'll pay even more for the 256 or 512 gigabyte versions. And the 11 Pro Max, the larger screen model, starts at $1,100. So I would hope at the very least you are getting that fast charger in the box. Okay, so that's a lot to take in, but we are not done yet. There's also another cheaper phone this year, which is the iPhone 11. No Pro, no Max, no S, it's just the 11. It succeeds the XR or XR, and again has the same overall size with a 6.1-inch LCD screen. It gets a new 12 megapixel true depth camera over last year's 7 megapixel, and you can now take 4K video and slow motion selfies, or wait for it, slofies, as Apple wants you to call it. Now that term was even trending on Twitter for a while, but I really hope that this doesn't catch on as a name. The sample video that we did see in the keynote though was pretty funny, so I'm definitely going to try and recreate this ASAP. Around the back of the 11, you get 2 cameras instead of 1 on last year's phone, a 12 megapixel regular wide angle and 12 megapixel ultra wide angle. You'll also get night mode like on the more expensive 11 Pro and Pro Max. And we're finally getting portrait mode that works on non-human subjects, like pets. Of course, you've been able to do this a long time on all other dual lens iPhones, but the XR never let you take portrait modes of anything other than humans. I actually had no idea how many people really cared about this feature until my Twitter totally blew up when I posted about it. Please continue to send me your portrait pet photos to my Twitter account @LexiSavides, please, and thank you. Now for color options, the iPhone 11 scraps the coral and blue from the XR and gets purple and green instead. Now there's 6 color options all up: purple, yellow, green, black, white, and red. Battery life is an hour more than the XR, which was and still is a bit of a beast. So Apple says you'll get 17 hours of video playback on the new device. Unfortunately, your storage options don't change. You'll still be getting 64, 128, or 256 gigabytes, which is the same. But at least this year it is cheaper per gig. Now, starting at $699 in the US, this is more affordable than the debut price of the XR, which was $749. This really seems like it's the iPhone for most people, maybe the one to get if you're coming from a much older device. For now, these are just the specs, and we'll have to wait until the reviews are in to really determine how much of an improvement they offer. If you're coming from something like an iPhone 6 or 7, there's no doubt you'll see significant improvements in the camera, faster performance, and improved screens. The iPhone 8 is still current. That is, Apple's still selling it, although it's now the cheapest option in the lineup. The XS and the XS Max, though, have been totally discontinued. My take right now is that these new phones probably aren't enough to upgrade if you're already rocking last year's iPhone. Maybe if you have the iPhone X, it might be worth it for the cameras. That's actually my work phone, and I know I would really appreciate an ultra wide angle lens and night mode, but it's not really a deal breaker for me, and especially not worth the extra cost. This year definitely feels very much like it's the first that might break the yearly or biannual upgrade cycle for some people. Yes, of course, there are benefits to having those additional camera features, but the latest and greatest camera might not be important to you. The better battery life and enhanced durability are nice too, especially if you want to use the phone without a case, but again, they're not huge updates, just features we'd expect in a yearly update. All that said, if you've decided that the new iPhone 11 or 11 Pro is the way to go, pre-orders for the new phones start at 5 a.m. Pacific time on September 13, and they'll go on sale a week later on September 20. Now, for those of you on the iPhone upgrade program or due for a new model with your carrier, this is of course a no-brainer. You're going to get one of these new phones because that's kind of the point. And Apple is also offering at least $100 off for some trade-ins, so maybe that might sway your decision too. But for everybody else who is not necessarily in the boat ready to upgrade, I'd love to know if the new phones are enough to make you hand over extra cash and trade in your old phone. Let me know in the comments below, or you can find me on Twitter at LexiSavides. I will read some of them next week on another episode of The Apple Core.